Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining in on our webinar this afternoon, Making Assessment Work for Students and Teachers in Essential English. My name is Kim Keane and I'm the National Webinar Manager for Cambridge University Press. Before I make a start, in the spirit of reconciliation, Cambridge University Press and Assessment acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Please know this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed by email to all those registered over the next few days. Within that, you will also receive a link where you have the opportunity to give your feedback on your experience this afternoon and note the free book that you would like to receive. You can ask any questions in the Q&A box, which we'll be monitoring throughout the webinar. But if you would like to hold off your questions, we will be having a Q&A session after the webinar with Julie. I'll be briefly discussing the pricing of the current textbooks and just running a couple of slides at the end. So if any of your questions pertain to pricing options for the current Essential English books, wait until the end and I'll let you know about those. Please let me introduce you to our author speaking this evening, Julie Arnold. Julie has taught English in Queensland schools for 25 years, working with students, teachers and leaders as head of department and literacy coach across schools in the Brisbane metropolitan region. On the management committee for the English Teachers Association in Queensland, she coordinates and presents professional learning and takes an active interest in curriculum development. Julie believes fundamentally in the power of language to create opportunities for all students to be critical and creative learners. Without further ado, please welcome Julie Arnold. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kim. And welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join me this afternoon. I also want to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people as First Nations owners of the land where QUT now stands and where I'm talking to you from this afternoon. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and I'd like to recognise that these lands have always been places for teaching, research and learning. I would like you to take a moment, please, to just pop the name, if you know it, of the country that you're speaking from in the chat space. This is for two reasons. The first is just because it's a lovely way to acknowledge traditional owners when you're a participant. But the other is because I'm going to ask you to pop something in the chat space about 4/5 of the way through the presentation. So I want to just make sure that that space is working. All right, just give you a few moments and then we'll get started. How are we going, Kim? Do we get some chat spaces?
Yes, everything looks good.
Great, let's get moving. So the webinar this afternoon focuses on some ways to achieve the kind of rigor and flexibility that students and teachers need in Essential English. I want to talk about four things. First, I want to make some observations about Essential English students, and then talk about some of the things about the Essential English syllabus that I think really make it a workable syllabus and in some ways the best of the English suite. Then I want to suggest some ideas for going about producing quality assessment design in the subject. And finally, I would like to suggest three principles, I think, for approaching improving teaching and learning in English. Please do feel free to add comments or questions in the chat. Kim can relay these to me at the end. If you think along the way of any ideas for a future webinar that you would like to see, then please let me know about that as well. I'm hopeful that by the end of our webinar this afternoon, that we will not solve all the problems of Essential English, but perhaps you'll have some ideas to take with you about how to design assessment and learning from the outset to be accessible to all students. All right, so who is Essential English? Well, more than 17,000 students study Essential English in Queensland, so that makes it the second biggest subject in the English suite after General English. But I would argue that it is the most diverse cohort. Students are on a range of pathways. It's not unusual for a student to be missing for one lesson a week for a school-based apprenticeship or traineeship. But equally, you'll have students in your class who are bound for university after they finish year 12, or who are bound for TAFE or the workplace. Essential English students are also culturally and linguistically diverse. Students with EALD backgrounds are probably overrepresented in some schools, especially when those schools don't offer English as an additional language. Socioeconomic status is an obvious but not much talked about factor. While most schools do offer Essential English, it's probably fair to say that lower socioeconomic status schools are doing the heavy lifting. Diverse learning needs are an important part of the picture and something that's of real interest to me. Think about this. If one in about 20 Australian school students are affected by an attention deficit disorder, that means that there's probably at least one student in every regular class who has ADD or ADHD. I wonder how that plays out in Essential English. 1 in 10, two in a class, 3 in a class, even more. Language disorders, which often overlap attentional difficulties, are even more common at about 13%. Research supports what Essential English teachers know is that many of these students have been under-supported and unsuccessful before they arrive at their Essential English class. And there's a bunch of other exceptional circumstances that they encounter too, which means that they may experience behavioural, emotional and social difficulties along with academic difficulties in greater numbers than other subjects in the English suite. Essential English teachers, who we know anecdotally sometimes are not specialist English teachers, are absolute champions to manage all of this diversity. So is Essential English all that different from General English? And how can we go about working with the Essential English syllabus in a way that helps us manage this diversity in the classroom? I don't want you to read all this now. It's a lot of text on the page. I'll point out the things I would like you to notice. If we look at the syllabus objectives, actually they look very similar between General English and Essential English. If you line them up, many of the differences are pretty semantic, or at least the meanings of the key terms in them are very similar and familiar. For example, it's tricky to explain really how audiences are much different to cultural contexts and social situations on the right. And there isn't much material difference between the idea of influence meaning and inviting audiences to take up positions. I'm always interested in this idea that in Essential English, we talk about language features and text structures, which is a very Year 10 junior curriculum way of speaking about language, and we use aesthetic features and stylistic devices. Having textual features across 2 objectives rather than 3, the one of them's hidden down the bottom, and eliminating the word grammar doesn't seem to amount to anything but a pretty fine distinction. The 2 syllabuses are still built on the context text model of language that English teachers are familiar with. And for those of you who aren't quite as familiar with that term, it means that when something happens in our context, we communicate it and communicate about it. And to do that, we create text in genres using text structures and language features that make sense in that social situation. But even though these syllabus documents look fairly similar, we know what the intent of the difference is. It signals that English Essential is not to be as conceptually complex. It doesn't require students to achieve the same degree of precision in their own communication, and foundational literacy skills like interpreting text and making meaning in the text that they create are important. Also, authentic audiences in situations that students might really encounter in their current worlds and in their future worlds are privileged over more abstract or historical purposes, especially when it comes to writing. You see this, of course, play out in the unit descriptions and in those assessment prescriptions as well. The key cognitive difference, as we well know, is between analyse and explain. I always think that the Essential English syllabus marginalises the cognition of analysis rather than eliminates it altogether. We all know that if you construct a text based on the representations that you see in a text that you're studying and represent that into a new text that you're creating, then you are actually by definition involved in analysis. But again, we take the message. Focus on identifying text structures and language features and explaining how they work to make meaning in texts. There isn't the same necessity for students to achieve cohesion across an argument when they're doing that. The focus is on getting the communicative work done. So much for the objectives. These are important to keep in mind. We need to know them well to design assessments and learning experiences. But beyond that, I think Essential English offers what are some really great opportunities to teachers and students. So here are some things I think that are worth appreciating about Essential English. While there is still that note about students having opportunities to experience the kind of assessments in Unit 1 and 2 that they'll later encounter in Unit 3, 4, there's not the same pressure to rehearse assessment performances, and you can really focus on connecting the needs of the students with the demands of the unit. So you can kind of let go a little bit of the rehearsal factor that we tend to get in the general subjects. Next is, I think, that the syllabus privileges, and I already said this, authentic assessment and learning. This is great. Kids do better when they have real and lifelike context to respond to in their learning. The new general syllabuses, I think, don't elevate that priority as much, and I think that the assessment is probably weaker for it. The third thing is that Essential English isn't dumbed down. I know some people think it's too hard compared with the old English communication, and I get that. But I also do appreciate that in Essential English, there are many students who have gaps in their learning from grade 10, things that they didn't pick up in their own experiences. And I'm glad that they have clear opportunities to engage in critical and creative thinking. Finally, and this one for me is a big deal as it pertains to this webinar because it brings together the other three things. Having diverse students in front of you shouldn't mean differentiating for every single student. It's an impossible task that we sometimes feel we're expected to perform. In fact, adjustments, especially to the summative tasks in Unit 3, 4, are very difficult to manage on an individual basis. What we should be trying to do, I think, is create assessment and learning that's more accessible from the outset. And I do think Essential English provides us with some opportunities for that. So how do you do it? How do you design assessment and learning from the outset to be more accessible to more students? Well, first you design accessible tasks. I'm going to speak about one today. I'll be referring to a task where kind of in the process of designing for the new edition of the Cambridge textbook. For our Unit 1 assessment, we decided to move away. This is the workplace text unit. We decided to move away from the travel unit. It's a good unit. I really enjoyed teaching it myself, but it's probably been overdone now. It might be, we wanted a chance to freshen it up. So let's see how it applies. The first piece of advice would be to take advantage of creative possibilities. Also take opportunities to ask students what they think they're interested in and what they'd like to do. Basically, for ours, we took a few different ideas for context to some Year 10 classes, I think I took it to 3 different Year 10 classes. Ideas we thought they'd be interested in or they would find relevant, like working in a retail environment or well-being and health. The message from them, though, was that entertainment and event management was the most appealing. And the reason they gave was that they didn't already learn about it somewhere else in school. We thought this was a great reason, really kind of sensible and something that would only be noticed by a student. So we've made the shift from travel to entertainment. The next piece of advice there is about keep it real. We wanted to find a real or lifelike purpose for the communication they do for this assessment. We decided on an actual event that actually hasn't happened for a few years, I think largely because of COVID, and that's Triple J's One Night Stand. Perhaps you are familiar with it. It's a one-night only concert hosted in a regional or remote town. The aim is not to make money, but to do something good in and for the community. We wondered whether it would work to have students imagining themselves involved in something like this and producing text that could be produced in this context. To work out the details, of course, we needed to go to the syllabus, which expects them to work with text structures and language features that are used in genres produced in this workplace. But also they're taking on particular workplace roles in this unit, and they need to come to understand that people they interact with in a workplace bring different perspectives and motivations. There's positioning that's going on. We liked the idea that a unit like this could gently introduce them, remembering it's Unit 1, into ways to understand those knowledge application objectives, introduce values, what's important to a particular person in a particular context, what do particular kinds of people believe about what's important, and also perhaps leading to those cultural assumptions, though I'm not sure they need to do that just yet. Anyway, this is what we came up with. We wanted to offer them some choice. We wanted them to have opportunities in a nice, easy way to work with their peers. And we wanted to be really clear about what was expected. I'm not going to read through all of this. I just wanted to point out kind of where we came to with it. So our idea for this Unit 1 is that they can create a portfolio of 3 work-related texts. And the first one involves them working together. It's a bit scary sometimes to do group work with students, and obviously teachers and schools will make their own decisions. But our idea was that they could work together to decide on a location and artist for the event, because that would be interesting conversation, and then just create one media post for a platform of their choice. Obviously, the work in that chapter presents some models and things that they can use. After that, we thought to have them respond to a challenge. So in each group, they select a particular workplace role. So you can see those here. There's a website manager. They encounter a particular scenario. So the one here is that 40 minutes before the concert, the lead singer can't go on. I forget the name of the artist, but this actually did happen to an American artist who visited Australia earlier this year, and it was a big deal. You can look it up pretty easily. And then present them with a communication challenge. So what they're going to need to do is write a press release, consider the needs and perspectives of their audience and what they're trying to achieve to solve that communicative problem. And there's a bunch of other things there. This is a work in progress. We're just working out some fine detail about it, but we like the way we like the suggestions that it's coming up with. The message that I want to give you is to be brave about your assessment in Essential English. Take advantage of those critical and creative possibilities. Ask students what they're interested in and would like to do. In volume 1 of the current edition of our Essential English book, we have provided this genre map, which documents a whole bunch of different genres that you might not have thought about yet that might be interesting to do in this subject. Keep it real, embrace real and lifelike contexts, offer choice and the opportunity to work together where you can, and be very clear in the way you word your assessment. All right, so this is the kind of approach to creating, accessible assessment tasks that we're using in our book, and then I hope that you bring to the design of your own tasks. For the last part of my talk this afternoon, I want to talk about 3 principles that I think we can apply really well in Essential English to improve learning. The basic premise is that I think being a good Essential English teacher means being very switched on to how your students are thinking and progressing. Some of them have failed a lot before they come to you, and they can arrive with patterns of behaviour and effort that work against you, building the kind of classroom culture that you want. There's often a need to reset attitudes, our attitudes as well as their attitudes, and this can be pretty demanding, energy-intensive work. So the first principle is I'm going to say expectations for teaching and learners. There's 2 parts for this. The first one I'll just cover briefly, which is to say that the best Essential English teaching I've seen begins with good general pedagogy. There are always clear learning goals that are shared with students, and these are communicated in really student-friendly ways. It might be learning intention success criteria on the board, but there are lots of other ways to make it clear to students. But these are in student-friendly language and are connected directly to those syllabus objectives so that they're faithful to the syllabus. It's also good teaching in and high expectations teaching in Essential English also regularly shares the criteria for success. So we show students what examples of how we want them to perform in class tasks, and also obviously how they perform in assessment tasks. Beyond that sort of basic pedagogical work, it's important to remember that our syllabus is based on the context text model. So to do it properly, you really need to be engaging with a genre pedagogical approach to planning. For those of you who are less familiar with genre pedagogy, that really just means that you need to carefully build field knowledge, provide input and learning about the subject matter connected to the unit. You need to model the kinds of text that they have to read and the kind of text that they need to create for their assessment and for class tasks, and work with them to pull those apart. We need to jointly construct text that they need to produce for assessment performance and help them work with each other on that as well on their way to independent construction. I'm not going to talk about genre pedagogy anymore. Suffice to say that each chapter in the Cambridge textbook follows this pattern of building knowledge, modelling, deconstruction, joint construction, and working to independent construction. What I did want to spend just a little more time on, though, was the idea of teacher noticing. We've already established that Essential English classrooms are very complex places, and we may find that we arrive into groups who have had negative experiences or who have gaps in their learning, and we want to recreate our learning cultures. So this teacher noticing is a kind of a tool I would like to offer you. So there's a lot going on in any given time, or not going on, as the case may be sometimes in class at any given moment. Teacher noticing suggests that teachers need to choose, or teachers do choose, what to focus on, what they'll ignore, how they'll interpret what they'll see in in the business of moving student learning forward. So here's just an example to try and make it a bit clear what I mean. One teacher might observe that a student has her head down on the desk in class. I'm not sure if that's ever happened to you. You've ever noticed someone's head on the desk in class. They might infer that she's being lazy. Another teacher might also observe that student with their head on the desk, but might draw a different inference. Perhaps they'll infer that the student has had a challenging week and that they need to take a break. So two different things to notice. Still, other teachers may not even pay attention to the student with their head on the desk. Instead, their attention is focused elsewhere on other things. Perhaps you're noticing the way that students in the groups you've set up are drawing on their personal experience to help them understand a text. Perhaps you're noticing how students are working together, or how well they're working together, or what you might be able to do to help them. Maybe you're noticing who seems to be able to easily access the work that you set up and who's struggling with it. Whatever you focus on and the inferences that you make do have consequences for the learning opportunities that students experience in class. So, for example, if you did infer that the student who has her head down is lazy, then you might not insist later that she engage with the work. In fact, you might even do that to avoid conflict of some kind. I'm pretty sure I've done that myself. If instead you inferred that the student needs a break, perhaps it's a student with on the autistic spectrum who you know needed to shut down for a little while in order to cope. If your inference is around them needing a break, you might have checked back in and helped the student find a way to access this work that she's missed while she's taking a break. There's no right or wrong answer here. There are so many noticings and decisions and inferences that we make every day. But the accumulation of these decisions about interactions sends a message to students that they are valued or not valued, that the work they're doing is important or can be let slide, that what they say and do matters or not for their learning, and for who they become, indeed, as learners and even people. In English syllabus terms, they are positioned by our noticing. Students are positioned by teachers noticing. We send message in that kind of textual environment of the class. Controlling what you notice as a teacher can be very powerful in the attempt to reset or set up classroom cultures. Because you're interacting all the time, I'd suggest that a more generous approach to noticing can help recreate students' identities and build positive learning cultures. You can make a real difference to their interest and motivation, but it isn't easy to do. I don't want to pretend that I have all the answers or that you're going to start noticing things and everything's going to get better. These are about habits and patterns over time, and these things are wrapped up with our own beliefs and our own values and our own attitudes to the subject and to our students that may not be as easy to unpick as we'd like to think. Cultural assumptions also play a part, the beliefs, attitudes and values of groups of people. This includes the cultural assumptions about essential English students that exist in your school or in your staff room or your faculty, about what different kids need and what they're capable of, and how you're expected to interact with students and what's expected of them in the subject. All right, that's a little bit of talk about noticing. I was hoping to engage you really briefly in an activity to illustrate this idea, and perhaps you'll go away afterwards and think a little bit about noticing in this subject. There is, I hope you can see a picture, an image on here. Let's say it's an essential English classroom, and I would like to know what you think is happening here. What do you notice? I asked you to pop something in the chat at the beginning, partly so that you would not be afraid to pop something in the chat now. So could you do that for me? There's some prompt questions in case you're a little bit stuck. So are these students working, avoiding working? Are they learning? What might they be learning? How do you know? What evidence are you using? And if you would like to think through the extended idea, what assumptions might you be making in that noticing? All right. Please do pop something in the chat. I'm going to be quiet for about a minute.
But in the meantime, let me run over my slides. So at least there's something that we can focus on while she's trying to get her internet back on. So if we could move to the next one, thank you. So as you know, these books have been out for a while now, but for those of you that haven't seen them yet or would like more information about them, these are the price points. Everything's out and available, and we can even organise digital sampling for anybody. So please reach out if you need to. If we can run to the next slide. Both myself and Annie, I'm sure that many of you recognise us. I'm the State Manager for Queensland, and Annie looks after Toowoomba, Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, and all the way up now through the northern regions of Queensland. So please reach out to either of us. All of this information is also on the website, the Cambridge website. So you're absolutely welcome to communicate with either of us at any time. I'll add this reminder now that the feedback form will be coming in an email, and it generally takes between 5 and 7 days. So don't expect it to suddenly be in your email box as you jump out of the webinar. There'll be a couple of days as we swing through everybody that's been registered and make sure that you all get the information that you need. Most important part of your feedback, of course, is choosing the free book. Which is always a great incentive. And another way, certainly if you haven't been using these books, a great way for you to be able to have a really good look through everything and see that it's for you. So let's just check and make sure that Julie's all good. How are you going, Julie?
Yeah, I'm back to it.
Yay!
Ironically, I deliberately stayed at uni where the internet is normally fantastic and reliable. That's how it goes. That's how it goes. Anyway, let us move right along. I'm aware that I was running perfectly on time and now not so much. So let's just get back into it. Kim, we won't spend lots of time on this now, but were there any interesting noticings in the chat?
Yes, there's actually heaps and heaps of them. So because we were sort of caught up in the moment of internet concerns, I didn't have the opportunity to read through all of them, but let me just pull one out that I like the look of here. And it's from Jocelyn Walters. Thanks, Jocelyn. It's a very happy, safe environment, lots of smiling, positive impressions. Students are learning in a more casual, friendly place and through discussions with the use of device and discussion, like that.
Lovely. Yeah, look, there's all different ways you can interpret what's going on here. I'm going to share a bit of a mea culpa moment. When I first saw this, I had a very ungenerous noticing, and that was that the students were playing with social media on their phone, and the teacher was complicit in them wasting time in their classroom. And I had to check myself and say, no, that's not that's not kind of the assumptions that I would like people to be bringing. Look, I'm gonna finish off there. I'm sorry that we couldn't interact a little bit more around that, but I think what I'd like you to take away from that is that this idea of noticing and deciding how it is you're going to respond, deciding what you're going to notice and how you're going to make inferences about how students are behaving in your classroom and participating in your work can be a bit of a lever that by the time we come to Essential English, where behaviours and work habits are ingrained, is really worth a bit of a try. That's principle 1. Principle 2 is a related principle, I think, and I'm calling it opportunities for interaction. When you are using something, when we're making decisions about things to include in a textbook, we tend to use what I'm going to call flat activities. So we tend to use a Freya model, for example, when we're as a routine for building vocabulary knowledge, but that tends to be a flat space where students use information and retrieve it into there to build a definition. It's really good stuff. The one on the right, again, is a good and useful activity. You know, look at the body language here and write down what you think these men might be saying. Great for script preparation. But again, it's a flat activity. What I think is important to do is bring this kind of learning to life by turning them into opportunities for interaction. Let me tell you, let me just show you what I mean by that. This idea here has been adopted from Ron Rickard's work in the Visible Thinking Project. It's really easy to find out information about that, and he has a whole lot of routines on the website there, the Project Zero website there, that you could take advantage of. But getting kids interacting around the work is always going to be helpful. I'm suggesting here that a making meaning routine might work really well. It's a routine around collectively constructing a definition. So it's kind of like a Freya model, but it's more collaborative. So the idea is that you have the big concept in the middle of the page. Students have sticky notes and they write a word that they can think of that's related to the main idea. Then they can add in their ideas, start concept mapping around here. You can see we've got adjectives here and ideas around each that demonstrate each, and then ultimately they're working towards building a definition. I'm sure all of the posters you create in classrooms around making meaning are going to look just as beautiful as this one does. The other, sorry, what I meant to say was this stuff is great. It's great for the kids to collaborate. It introduces them to expectations around, you know, deeper learning. But how it relates to this noticing is that it provides opportunities for teachers to notice different things. It provides you with the opportunity to hear the vocabulary that they're using, to see how they're interacting with each other, and make more inferences about their learning than flat activities tend to do. The other example I've got here is, you know, this one is fine around, as I said, preparing them to script write or noticing knowledge about body language. But whenever we can, getting in something like this, a role play is going to be something that you want to try and engage your students with. How much better to have them role play this scenario, as long as it doesn't get out of hand, I suppose, and have them come back to that script writing activity with sort of richer ideas about what they can do. Again, when they do this role play compared to what I'm calling the flat activity, there's more opportunities for you and for them to notice what they've been learning. A quick note here, it's July. I'm speaking to you in July. If your class isn't already doing these kinds of activities in class, it's going to take a bit of time for them to get used to new routines. The beginning of the year, the beginning of the term, semester, unit, even week is probably the time to start new things if they haven't been happening already. All right, principle 3 is around rigor, rigor in interpreting and making meaning, these two big pillars that are attached to the explained cognition that drives the essential English syllabus. I'm not one really much for doing the sell job on a textbook. It's not really my jam to sort of overtalk or oversell all of the amazing features. But what I would say is that the place for a textbook really is in this work, I think. When we create a textbook like this, we've spent many, many hours selecting appropriate texts, thinking about the kinds of literacy routines that will work, the questions at different, literal, inferential and critical levels that you might ask. So, for example, we use text-dependent questions quite frequently, and and relying on these text selections and the kinds of questions that are asked, and when you can make them, the activities as interactive as possible, is really going to enrich your study in the subject. You know, keep the bar high, but very supported in Essential English. I've popped this last one up here around perspectives, just to remind me to let you know that all of the explanation that we do of the important concepts, for example, perspective, are constant works in progress. You know, we've thought really carefully about the best ways to explain perspective. So Principle 3 is really about text selection and scaffolding literacy learning. So students are interpreting text and making meaning from those texts and practicing having opportunities to respond. All right, that is pretty much it from me. Just a reminder that we talked earlier, we've talked through this webinar about a bunch of things that we can do to think about making our assessment in Essential English accessible to students, and our learning work for as many students in the room as we can. And this involves having clear expectations for how teachers go about their teaching in a syllabus appropriate way, and about how we notice what our learners are doing and bring them into a productive culture. It also is about providing opportunities for interaction and student action, so that our students are not passive receivers of knowledge in our classrooms. And finally, that we adopt a rigorous approach to interpreting and making meaning, and it may be that a textbook is especially useful for that. Essential English needs lots of teachers who are going about this work and taking their roles seriously. And so I would encourage you to share these things, share your great practice, your great attitude and noticing back in your staff rooms when you're doing your work with your colleagues. All right, and I think I'm going to leave it there. If there are any questions or comments, or even suggestions for future webinar topics that you'd like to make, I would really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Julie. That's awesome. Well, while we're waiting for people to think of their questions, we probably only have time to answer a few, but I've got one here from one of our publishers, actually, which is a good one. How do you encourage or instill a love of or appreciation of English texts? Is this an antiquated idea of having to appreciate texts or literature, for example?
Oh my goodness, that's such a big question, isn't it? There's a brilliant book out from the Australian Association for Teachers of English that came out, I think, early this year, called Novel Ideas. It might have been late last year. And there's some great ideas in Novel Ideas for selecting texts. Essential English is a really hard space there, because we do have a lot of students who have turned off reading for whatever reason, who struggle to read. I think the best advice is around opportunities for interaction. So making the connection with the text we read as active as we possibly can, involving students wherever possible, with selecting text, with not having to always everybody study this. If there was ever a place to offer them choice, here it would be, I think.
Yeah. So we've got another one too. Do you have any good scaffolded activities in the books for students with very low level writing skills?
Yeah. So what we tend to do as routine, which you can kind of copy, adopt, provide additional opportunities. So we will often, and especially in book one, provide, say, excerpts of a text where they can see what text structures and language features are being used, and then moving on to perhaps a version of that's almost a close activity, and then giving them a bit more open opportunities. So it's really about working from one place to another. I really do feel for teachers having to cater for those really low literacy levels where they've experienced such gaps through grade 9 and 10, because it is a constant challenge. The only thing I can say, and please don't take this as I guess casting the concern aside, is that keeping high expectations for continuing to do that scaffolded work is really the way forward.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if there's no more questions coming through, but I did want to let everyone know too, if you do think of anything later on, you can always email either myself or Annie, and we can share anything with Julie too, so that she can respond either directly with you or send something back through us. So it's not the end of it. Yeah. Thanks so much, Julie. Thanks for your time. And well done for getting through the technology glitch. It has to happen at least once, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, on behalf of Cambridge and everyone here, thank you so much for all of your efforts and putting everything together this afternoon. It's been great having you, and thank you all for coming along this evening, and have a good evening to you all.